Here are today's hosts.
Good morning, everyone. This is Nathaniel Lee, and I'm pleased to be broadcasting again another show, some exciting legal issue. Joining me today is my superstar lawyer, Milton, who led the revolution in police misconduct investigation with the Rodney King case. We're so happy to have him because, folks, in our city of Indianapolis, those type of police misconduct, and particularly the killing of African America, is still on the rise here in the city of Indianapolis. And we still see incidents all across the country that is still a relevant issue in our judiciary. And but thanks to a lawyer like Milton Grimes, maybe we get some justice and accountability. How you doing today, Attorney Grimes?
Good morning, Nathaniel. I'm doing fine. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes. There was a couple important issues that came up that I want to cover real quickly. All over the TV stations, we've seen a collage of people attacking the Trump case. And I want to go over something real quickly, Milton, before we get started.
Go ahead.
Michael Cohen, back in August of 2018, was pled guilty to a number of criminal charges. And one significant part of it was campaign finance violation. And the campaign finance violation had to do with his involvement with the Trump campaign, specifically giving money to Stormy Daniels, arranged for these different payoffs to women who he allegedly had extramarital affairs. Well, the same campaign violation was what Donald Trump was convicted of. And he was charged and convicted 34 felony counts. And it had to do with the same criminal violation of Michael Cohen. Now, what's the difference? Michael Cohen, folks, was prosecuted by Donald Trump's Justice Department. Donald Trump was the president at the time. His Justice Department prosecuted his personal lawyer in part for the campaign violation. And now, all over the news, there's been politicians saying that the conviction was a sham, although Michael Cohen went to prison for the same thing. Hey, Milton, I've been stretching my head. I don't understand this, why people could be politicians, get away with what is just significant misrepresentation.
Well, Nathaniel, you were scratching your head about this last week, but it's still the same. They're just being hypocritical in that one justice system, because it was Trump's justice system, was right in prosecuting Michael Cohen for violating the law. But since it was information and facts that affected Mr. Trump, then it was wrong. So it's just a hypocritical lie that they are telling. And that's what they're presenting the public with today, is the big lie. So that's what we got, man.
Well, I'm still amazed, though, as to the level of how these things are communicated to the public. It's almost like there's a certain amount of politician, the truth doesn't matter anymore.
Right.
And they feel that if they just keep repeating something over and over again, and you know what? It's working. Yeah, I'm just shocked when I looked at the poll numbers that the number of American people think that the conviction was a sham. Like what they say, 60-some% of Republicans, 68% thought it was a sham, despite the fact that the same set of facts, the same evidence that convicted Michael Cohen is what convicted Donald Trump. And so these same folks somehow ignores the fact that Trump Justice Department determined that the same evidence constituted felonies. I don't get it.
Well, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name. It's the 13 Stars, I believe, is the name of the book. And it talks about back in 1770s when the 13 colonies were trying to get support to fight Europe and establish their independence, they really started out and continued a lie to the American people by printing on their 2-page papers that the Native Americans were killing the whites in the outlying territories and drinking their blood. And the African Americans who were enslaved were rebelling against their masters, and would put incidents and locations of rebellions of the slaves and raping the white women. And it was terrifying the country. But that was by the founding fathers of our country. It was outright lies that they had decided to issue to the public so that they could get them in a frenzy to join and support the fight against England. Now, whether or not it was a worthy cause or not, it was a lie that they utilized to get the fever and the furor of the people going. So the big lie is not new in our politics, Nathaniel. It's been here since we've been here, the big lie.
And by the way, listeners, our call-in number is 833-653-3529. That's 833-653-3529. Now, here's the problem. I've seen over and over again in the history of America, after that Civil War between the states that dealt with the institution of slavery, blacks were property, and there was a war between certain southern states and the North. In essence, after the war, there was a high number of African Americans selected to various offices. And then there was the passage of the Black Codes, the Jim Crow laws. And what led to the reduction in these Black elected officials was they were accused them of criminality, whether it was theft or otherwise. And that been a very a death sentence for Black politicians for generations and generations. And no African-American Black politician ever survived any of these scandals. You see politician after politician, their career, they're finished. And now we see a politician who can't conduct business in his home state because he's deemed to have committed fraud, been convicted of 34 felonies, had a judge says that he raped a woman in a department store, and it goes on and on and on. And somehow a large number of people in America think that he should be the president of the United States. I don't get it, Milton.
You don't get it, Nate? I get it. I've read something about it. I wish I could read more, but it's we live in a black and white world still, and people who have been entitled, like Trump has been, they don't get that you don't get it. I mean, it's how it is. I'm sorry, I don't have anything super intelligent to say about it other than that's how it is. And we don't want to acknowledge that and accept that, but that is how it is. Fortunately, the jury did look at the evidence and did what they think or they thought was right. I truly expected a hung jury at the best out of that prosecution, but it seemed as though American people are waking up, Nathaniel, so hopefully they will continue to be awake.
Well, the next item is that, you did something extraordinary in the Rodney King case. Civilly, they were eventually held accountable. But Milton, it seems like despite all these wars and these battles that we see we had the George Floyd incident where they were brought to justice for murdering George Floyd. But everywhere I go, I still see these police shootings that are cropping up again. It's almost like we had a lull. Now there's an increase in these shootings. Everywhere
Right.
I see African Americans at risk from these police shootings.
Right. It's at the height of the King case, you were changing police chiefs in cities, and they were training. There was change in training and sensitivity, and an attempt to get officers from the neighborhood as opposed to outside of the neighborhood. And then things went back to things as usual, and the police killings continued. And we had a little drop in it after George Floyd, and a consciousness that came about, but people are going back to their old habits. Why? Because they haven't changed the culture, and they haven't changed the how do I want to say it? The respect between the races. They haven't convinced white folks, I guess, to respect us to the degree that we're going to have a significant change for a long period of time or forever. Nathaniel, this country was born on racism, and it's still here. Like I say, it dies down after a big event some years, and then it seeps back up. So we still have to fight racism in this country. It is not over.
Well, what was astounding here locally is that last year, in about a 3-month time period, we had 8 African-American shot and killed by police officers, 18. It was just an onslaught of these death cases, right? In retaliation, there was a certain group of Black ministers say, let's fire the chief. We had an African-American chief at the time, and they banded together. And so the chief, at the end of the term, he resigned, and they have a new chief. We still have police shooting and killing, and they're not complaining about it. Hey, can you do me a favor? I want to throw that in the microwave, but as soon as I get there.
Absolutely. Do you want me to do it right now?
And just bring it back in about and so what happened, Milton, despite the fact that these killing continues even today, like I investigated several of these cases. We had a young man who was having a medical crisis and wrecked his car and climbed up in a tree, and 2 police officers were there at the bottom of the tree telling him to come down. And he was saying, I'm having a medical emergency. I need to talk to my doctor. He goes on and on and on. And they were standing there talking to this guy. A 3rd police officer comes to see Milton, and the first thing he does, look in the tree and start shooting the guy. Unarmed suspect. And then they spent a whole day. The police department did something extraordinary. In order for him to defend himself, I learned early on that at our academy, I learned through a source that they were teaching officers to say, I was in fear of my life. So They justified a murder by saying, I was in fear of my life. And that's why I did it. And so the police officer who does the shooting will invariably say that. Now, the problem, though, is that in this shooting, Milton, what occurred is that after the guy's murdered, they did something unusual. They cut the tree down and shredded it, looking for a gun. So obviously his defense is that he was an armed suspect, but he wasn't.
Right.
And so the community should have been outraged by this. And then we had a second incident where a guy was shot through a fence in the back. So we have this, it's a crisis now that people are overlooking, and I'm concerned about it.
That thing about, today's paper, front page of today's paper, talking about over in Pasadena, one of our luxurious, nice cities, Pasadena, upscale city. They have gangs in the police department, just like in LA proper. The problem is there's 3 or 4 different gangs. Officers have formed gangs. They have tattooed themselves. They're gang tattoos. And that's a culture within the police department, that police officers are beating up each other if you don't do what we say or do what I say, or if you oppose this. So inside of the police department, there are gangs. But bigger problem is the culture of the police department has not changed significantly in its relationship to the minority community, especially. They still look at us as less than them, and they can do what they want on the whole and get away with it. Even with body cams, is when they can turn them off, turn them on, and officers protecting one another. They haven't changed the culture in the police department. I remember reading some time ago in Malcolm Gladwell's book about police officers. He described it as emotional labor, is the description he gives their labor, just like attorneys do emotional labor. Airline hostesses, people who work with people on a daily basis, they do emotional labor, and that is their anger and their calmness and their fear. It goes up and down each day. Each day they walk out of their house, and until they come back in their house, they are involved in situations that raises their fear factors and cause them to be angry. And so it's described as emotional labor. And his position, and I think it's quite well put, that we need to train, we need to get more educated, better educated people to serve as police officers, and we need to pay them a decent wage, one representative of their responsibilities and duties out there, and not get just, and it's not putting anybody down with just a high school education, but to require a higher education of them like we do in other professions, and pay them a salary commensurate with that duty and responsibility that they have with the public, and not pay, some guys don't have enough to pay for their room, board, and cars and the expenses of living. So they got to have a nighttime job, or they got to do something else to make ends meet. So, and they're arresting people that, are better off than they are. So they're angry about that. So we got to look at the culture and the structure of law enforcement before we get the change that you're talking about we need and we want to have. It's an old saying about if you don't change, you're going to remain the same. And that's, I think, is a good analysis of our present day police department. There has not been enough change in the structure of it, so we're getting the same results we've been getting.
I noticed something that was remarkable that occurred down in Louisville, Kentucky during the PGA Championship at Valhalla Golf Course. I've watched this. They arrested world's #1 golfer, well, the ranking, because they took the Live Tour golfers out of the mix. And so the rankings of the top golfers are a little bit skewed now, because you have this rival golf tour, what used to have maybe out of the top 20 golfers in the world, maybe about 12 of them went to the Live Tour, and they've lost their ranking. But in any event, he's the current #1 ranked golfer in the world, according to that golf ranking. And when he was going to the tournament, he encountered a police officer, a Louisville police officer, and he was arrested for allegedly dragging him or something, and he was thrown in jail, and then he released the same day. Well, interesting, they end up disciplining the police officer because he didn't have his body cameras on, and the charges were dismissed against Scotty Scheffler, and he agreed not to sue. I was looking at that with great interest, because Louisville is the same city that allowed the cops to have this raid where they killed the young lady in an apartment, and it did a botched investigation, and it was just a terrible outcome. But it seemed like that they could achieve justice and accountability within a matter of weeks. And I was startled by that, Milton, because I'm thinking, so they have the tools to do justice, but they do it episodically, depending on who the persons are that are involved in the process.
Right.
And so, so we still see a two justice system in America, one that does not adequately look at the interests of minorities. And here's a famous person who, I hate to say this, but looked like he received preferential treatment from the allegation. The allegation pretty serious that was lodged against them. It turns out they may have been false, but they were serious. And I've had a number of clients that have the same ordeal. In order to get out of it, one case, it took a whole year to clear this client's name, whole year in our justice system for a similar type of misconduct. And in your neighborhoods in LA, is there an increase in this type of incident? Is the police misconduct still just as prevalent today as it was when Rodney King, or they've gotten a lot better?
There's still police killings of individuals, and families are suing and saying, and in some cases, it's I think a case last week or something where I think the jury awarded the family a recovery, where police are accused of lying about guns being in people's possession or guns pointed at them or resisting arrest. So it's happening. I can't put the statistical number on it, but yeah, it's still happening, that Nathaniel, because we haven't changed the culture. I've had cases, I've seen cases, I have had cases where I know the officers have lied, told two different stories about the person was, I thought the person was attacking me with their handcuffs on. And then a week later said, oh, I thought the person was reaching for a weapon in their back pocket. Two diametrically opposed stories. And when they went to trial, those stories came in because the officer didn't testify, and the jury hung 10-2 for the criminal conviction. We settled the civil rights case, but just watching the criminal case against this officer for blinding this woman in this one case, he told two different lies, and the jury still did not convict him. It was a 10-2 down in Riverside. So officers know that the public holds them in high regard and hold them up to a level of, you got to prove their guilt. Prosecution has to prove their guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, because they come in the courtroom with the presumption of innocence, clothed in it, and different than the average defendant, Black defendant especially. We come into the courtroom, there's a presumption of guilt, and you got to prove that's not true. Police officers come in with the presumption of innocence, and they know that. So all they need is one juror in a criminal case to say, no, you're not guilty. And that happens a lot of times. So that's the risk that they take, and body cams have affected that some, but it hasn't eliminated officers coming in and saying, nah, that didn't happen like you see on the camera. Your eyes are lying to you. And I'm going to explain it this way. And one or two jurors will take that and go with it.
Milton, I've seen a proliferation of the body cams and the video cameras on the police dashboard. What has happened is that when I've seen dozens of cases where police officers, once they turn their lights and sirens on, it activates a camera inside of their car, right? And I had a couple police shootings that everything is recorded on video camera. It was just really incredible evidence. And so because everything was recorded on video cameras, we were able to get a pretty good recovery against a local sheriff department outside of Indianapolis. But when I looked at the actual report of what occurred in the video, there was a big difference, of course, right? So since the Rodney King case, has there been significant results that you've seen obtained from the video cameras or the body cameras, and how helpful has that been in terms of your practice?
Well, I would say, Nathaniel, that it has been helpful. There's no doubt in my mind that it has been helpful. I remember I used to dub the Rodney King case as we finally caught the Loch Ness Monster. We finally caught the Loch Ness Monster, because so many times in my career, young men would say, the police beat me and they called me the N-word. They were beating me and they called me the N-word. And I'd have to look at them and say, well, it was you and there's 3 police officers, 4 or 5. And in the report, they're all saying that you attacked the officer. You struck first. How do I disprove that? With just your word? We got no witnesses, man. And you're on parole, or you were on probation. And so, yeah, I can believe you, but I can't prove you. I can't prove that. And so here we get the Rodney King video from this gentleman named Holloway. And yes, it has, and then we get the advent of body cams in some police departments. And yes, that has assisted in resolving where the truth is, but it hasn't stopped the brutality, because a lot of officers control those body cam videos, and a lot of them say that the camera doesn't show everything, what happened before, or what was said, or what's off camera that scared them. And so I have to admit, though, I think it has helped the victim prove their case a lot more than we had in the past, but it still hasn't changed the culture necessarily of the police department, Nathaniel. And they get out there and they still think that they are entitled to do what they want to with us. So that's what we got.
Well, one of the things that I've observed is that they don't necessarily maintain their body camera on to film all of the events. Now, in some cases, I've had some really good body cam footage that shows some very detailed events that occurred. But one of the things that I think that citizens must do to hold police officers accountable, there's something else, Milton, that I thought that was really important. When a police shooting occurs, I thought that one of the most important aspects is that they take a videotape statement immediately of the police officer, where he go into detail exactly what he did and why he did it, and detail the circumstances that led to the shooting and the shooting itself, step by step. Because what happens is, so before they look at the body cameras or the video footage from areas, have them articulate what happened.
Right.
And I thought that was so important when my earlier trials of police misconduct cases, because we would get video footage that completely contradicted what they said.
Right.
And those cases were all successful. But then they were too successful. Locally, after a couple of those trials, our local police department here quit taking the officer's statement after shootings. And then on some of my shooting, they took the officer's statement 9 months later, Milton, 9 months after he looked at all the evidence.
Right.
And that's when he had a statement, which I just thought was a waste of time. And so I think citizens have to take one more step. It's not just body camera we need to have them do recorded statements after the shooting.
Yeah, Nathaniel, I hate to extend what I was saying earlier, but I have to. The case I was talking about where the young lady was blind, the officer told 2 stories. He had a dash cam when he drove up on the lady, the dash cam came on. It shows him getting her out of the car, coming back between the 2 cars and doing a field sobriety test, etc. And it showed him putting the cuffs on her wrist, or attempting to. And she asked him, "What did I blow, officer?" Because she knew she had blown on the breath. Like, "What did I blow? What did I blow?" And he won't respond. And he said, "If you don't stop resisting, I'm going to pepper spray you." She said, "Officer, I'm not resisting. I just want to know, what did I blow?" And she turned her head, not her body. "What did I blow?" And so he take his pepper spray gun and go, bam, shoots her with this pepper spray gun that shoot a jet stream of pepper spray 405 miles an hour over a 20-foot span. That's the projection of it. And she screams. Her family is standing out there watching this whole thing. And his sergeant comes, because they have to call the sergeant now because there was a use of force. And he tells his sergeant that she took the handcuff that was on one wrist and she was attacking him. And he thought she was going to, quote, murder him and his partner who was there with him. That's why he shot her with the pepper spray. He takes her to the hospital. The sergeant tells him, "Okay, They have the paramedics. They came, they cleaned her up. He takes her to the hospital, cleans her up. They take her into surgery, emergency surgery. And after 3 hours, come back and the doctor said to her mother, I'm sorry, she's blind in both eyes for the rest of her life.
Oh my
She's
goodness.
totally blind. A week later, Internal Affairs interviewed the same officer. And he says, I thought she was reaching for a weapon in her back pocket because after he shot her with the pepper spray, Sergeant told him that you better check her before you take her to the hospital. He found a box cutter in her back pocket because she was the manager of the dairy section at the Kmart. And she used a box cutter to cut open boxes and do her job. And so he changed his story. He changed his story from she was attacking me with the handcuff as a weapon to I thought she was reaching in her back pocket for a weapon because he found a weapon. Now, what made him think that they were going to forget the first story? I don't know. But all of it was on the dash cam. It was on the dash cam. We settled the civil case for her blindness. He goes to trial with that criminal allegation. And the jury hung 10-2 for guilt. 2 people would not vote him guilty. With those facts, they would not vote him guilty. So there's a hung jury and they tried a second time and there was a dismissal because of some argument over an evidentiary ruling by the court. So the court mistried the second trial. It was set for trial a third time. And the DA, over my objection and my argument at the sentencing, the DA said, well, I don't think I can get a conviction here in Riverside. You can get a conviction if you try the case, right? You got 2 different lies and the woman is blind. What's the problem? So they dealt the case for misdemeanor, time served. That was overnight in jail. And that's what this officer got for blinding a woman for the rest of her life. And you got it on video and he changed it. And so it may be an unusual case, but I say it happens more frequently than not. The jurors just do not want to convict a police officer. And the cops know that. They know they're inside with the community and the people.
It's a sad story. And I've seen in my own experience here in Indianapolis, after a police action shooting, when we proved that the officer committed murder, they promoted the officer. It's insulting. It keeps me up at night because you try to get justice and accountability and you just can't. Even monetary justice is not sufficient in these cases. There has to be some form of punishment beyond, because the money doesn't come from the officer, it comes from the insurance companies or the budgets of the corporations, but not from the individual. And that's the sad thing about that, so they're not held to be accountable like ordinary citizen. And that's what we have to change, the culture. Now, the other issue has to deal with these stops. I want to briefly talk about that. One of the things that I see is that a lot of African Americans are still subject to random stops, Milton. And what advice would you give to someone if they're pulled over by a police officer, driving while African American, driving while Black? What is the best method of handling that situation from your standpoint?
Nathaniel, I'm always perplexed by what to say about that because I believe a man has a right to stand up for himself in the face of a police officer or authorities. He doesn't have to be aggressive about it, but I just never abided by the instruction to tell our sons to bow their heads and say yes sir, no sir, and kowtow to the police. Are you there, Nate?
Yes.
Okay. I just don't go along with that. I never taught my son that. I always told him to respect the police, but he doesn't have to be afraid of them. and to stand up for who he is. Cooperate with them, but I probably in the minority on telling people what to do when they are stopped by the police. The California Supreme Court came down with a new case about a month ago entitled People versus Flores, where the justices decided that even when a person sees a police, or the police see a person and that person is ducking and dodging and avoiding the police, that does not give cause for them to detain or stop that person, that you have a right to avoid the police today. And that's because African Americans, the court has accepted, have a psychology that makes them not want to be in contact with the police officer. So police cannot use the fact that this person was walking away or avoiding them or appeared to be trying to move out of the area because the police is coming, because that could be an act that's done because you're afraid for your life. And so they've accepted that they need more than just a person avoiding contact with them to detain them and question them and arrest them. The previous police chief here in LA established a policy that you cannot stop a car, a vehicle, or a pedestrian walking without probable cause or reasonable suspicion that they are about to commit a crime or are committing a crime. It can't be because you're in a drug neighborhood or you're in a minority neighborhood or they looking like they may have done something. That's not good enough. Now, how this thing is going to be interpreted in future cases, we're going to see. I got a case coming up where I'm going to be arguing that the stop of my client was based upon the color of his skin and not his activities. So it's an ongoing process.
Yeah, let me take a caller. Pierre Pullen, you have a question or comment for us today, sir?
It's an ongoing process.
Yes, Nate, can you hear me?
Loud and clear, sir.
Yeah, Milton, I actually had two questions because you guys were talking about police investigations. But in your jurisdiction, Milton, I think I read there's some questions. Police have to tell you why they stopped you anymore. They can't just start questioning you immediately about what you did and all of this when they stop you in California. Is that true?
Yeah, I read something like that. I haven't had that case to come up yet. I have the cases that we're saying that it definitely was a profile stop, and they're lying about furtive gesture, and the gesture was an innocent gesture as well as it could have been a furtive gesture. But yeah, that's true.
Okay. And one of the things I want you guys to address, and you know, Nate, this has been a big issue with me, and it's not just about police investigations, it's about government investigations. When you when you file a complaint with the police, or in my case, the election board and all of this stuff, and you know, my case went to the Seventh Circuit and on all of that and was dismissed. Here's the thing. The government never investigated my allegations, and they can't say that they did. What do you guys think about that when police departments and government entities just flat ignore complaints that you filed or whatever and don't investigate them? What do you think about that?
Well, I think you should get,
if
I may address that, Nate, I think you should get yourself a good lawyer who's going to pursue your case, because that's our responsibility. We police the police, okay? Just like the police, they police the community and the public to get criminals. Well, we police the police to make sure they do their job and that they grant you your rights. And if they don't, we want to show that. And if they didn't, we want you to be compensated for that. So that's what a good lawyer is supposed to be doing. what was done wrong here or what wasn't done that should have been done in this investigation or this contact of my client with the police. So we police the police. And that's all I can say is that you get somebody who know what they're know what the rules are and go through them step by step to see what wasn't done or what was done wrong or where a lie is. That's the best I can say.
Well, Pierre, here's my
Absolutely.
hey Pierre, here's my take on it. Every day we get phone calls from people and we have to make the same analysis. The first analysis, we have to determine whether or not it's a viable cause of action. And if so, what are the next steps? The second one is it's not a viable cause of action. Or the third analysis is that it's a meritorious claim, but maybe too expensive to litigate since we upfront the cost. So in other words, you make that same analysis on every case, right? So when you go out and hire a lawyer, they have to look at the amount of time involved, the expected recovery from the case. So a lot of times when you talk to lawyers about cases, they don't pursue the case because it like economic viability. You could be right about something, but if you have to spend 1,000 hours to prove that you're right, then you can't do the case, unless it's some horrendous verdict you're looking at in millions and millions of dollars. But so you have to make this type of assessment. And that's what the problem is with a lot of times. People have meritorious cause of action, but it's too expensive to litigate. Justice ain't free. And as time has gone by, it's becoming more expensive to litigate cases. A simple case that we take to trial last year, we spent about $60,000 to $90,000 on trial, plus the fact you take 2 weeks of preparation and not count the number of depositions, things like that. So it's not what people think. You see on TV, you see an event, then the lawyers show up in court. Well, that's just TV. That's not the real world. The real world is that you have to work night and day to develop the cases, and you spend a lot of time and money, and that's what happens. So when you have a case that you're concerned about investigation, it's an economic issue most of the time, Pierre, and that's why cases.
Well, real quickly, and I'll get off. Milton, that may be what y'all do in California, but I'm gonna tell you that's not what they do here, because you got a lot of lawyers that will be afraid to take a political case or a case. Nate's probably one of the few that'll sue the police department. My thing is, if an average citizen goes to an agency, maybe he even files a tort claim, don't you think that agency, at the very least, should perform even a perfunctory investigation or look at the situation? Because my opinion is, if a citizen brings a complaint to your agency, I don't care if you think it's meritorious or what. Say they did this, they did that, the cop did this, the official did this. At the very least, the agency should look into it and say, we looked into it, we didn't find nothing.
Well, I think every individual, and you can't make a blanket statement that they got to investigate everything that come to them. They got to size it up, like Nate just said, as to what am I dealing with here? How much am I going to have to invest in experts? How much am I going to have to invest in an investigation and witnesses investigation? And what would be the likely outcome of putting this case on? Is it going to be $1? Or is it going to be 10,000? Or is it 100,000? Is it going to pay for my time? And you got to select these cases that you invest your time in, because believe it or not, we don't have so much time in our life to do stuff. And so that's what the lawyer is. I used to jump on a case when it came in the door. If I saw some blood, I got it. But I had to calm my approach down as I got older. I can't take every case that walked in the door where I may have empathy for the victim. I swear, that's why I say we finally caught the Loch Ness Monster, because if it hadn't been for the Rodney King video, it would have been another case that I would have said, I'm sorry, brother. We can't prove what you're saying. You got to take that whooping and thank God you're still alive.
Right. But again, my only point is, even if it's not before a lawyer or whatever, if somebody files a complaint with an agency, do you think that that agency, the agency, should look into it, or like I said, just glance at it and provide them with a response? We looked into it, we didn't find nothing.
I think the agency owed the public a responsibility of making sure that these officers with guns and power to kill people are doing their job properly. But the fox in the hen house is hard to get a good count with the fox in the hen house. You gotta, hopefully that you got the right agency, but all police agencies are not the same. So I think it goes without saying that some agencies investigate their own differently than others. I got a case out here in California where 5 cops ended up killing this man and woman in their car after they was in their sleep for an hour, and they blew their heads off. And we settled the case. The police officers got fired. Police department fired them. But the district attorney turned down a prosecution just 2 years ago. Turned down. They would not file criminal charges against these officers. And I thought it was open and shut based upon my investigation on the Silver case. So, Pierre, it's not a fair world we live in, bro.
Yeah, well, that's what we should be telling everybody else out there who don't get justice. It ain't a fair world. My thing is, if the agency gets complaints from citizens, and I'm not just talking about a police agency, I'm talking about any agency. This didn't happen right, or that didn't happen right, or whatever. The agency receives it, it's proof that they received it, or whatever. At the very least, in the United States of America, they should respond. We looked at it, nothing there. Here's your letter.
I agree.
Or whatever.
I agree with you. You're making a
That's
right
what I was saying.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. That was interesting. My frustration, Milton, Mr. Pierre, is that, all these cases I did for police misconduct, there's a common theme. So even when we prove that they engage in misconduct, there's no consequence to the officer. They get promoted, they still have their job, they still have their pension. There's no consequence.
Right.
And so one of the problems that we have, there's a missing step in our justice system. That is that, so even when you hold them accountable by having somebody pay money, there's no justice in terms of the misconduct. They're promoted, they're protected by the union, and it all goes away. The public get upset, they may march, they may protest, and then one day everybody forgets about it. And it's just another fatality, and almost like, but the victims cares, their family members, it with them the rest of their lives. They think about that every day. They're tormented by these miscarriages of justice.
As hard as it was for me to believe, but I do believe it, people inside of the department have come out after they retired and told the truth that officers oftentimes would joke when they change and they're talking about things, my case was bigger than yours, I whooped that butt better than you did, yeah, because they only awarded $1 million on your case and they awarded $3 million on mine. And they be boasting of the fact that the public has to pay more money for their case than they did for that officer's case. So it's like a badge of honor, the more damages they inflicted on a person, if that makes sense.
It's terrible because you've created a culture of violence towards citizens because when they're not being held personally liable. So what I think we have to do, the next stage in our justice system, is that we have to come up with a better plan to hold them accountable. I mean, would that mean that taking away their benefits, their pension, making them contribute to the recovery? We have to have something as an incentive to prevent this misconduct. Now, we do have a problem. We do have, like in our state, we have too many guns. Recognize the fact that officers, they're in danger in terms of, because everybody got guns now. I understand that. Well, not everybody, but there's a high amount of guns that are on our streets. The NRA and others have gotten the laws so that they've bought out our state representatives and legislators, and they have guns without any background checks. And in our state, we've seen the past legislation, and the net result is that it results in so many teen violence. Now the kids can get guns from anywhere. But at the end of the day, though, it still doesn't excuse the fact that they are being justified by killing these individuals. But the question becomes, Milton, whether or not the shooting was really necessary. And that's our challenge.
Yeah, we talked last time, Nathaniel, about the article that I think I received from you about the 52,000 police incidents or crime scenes in the last 2 decades. In 52,000 of those crime scenes, former police weapons were involved. And so the police department is being very hypocritical. On one hand, they're complaining about the number of guns on the street, but on the other hand, they're turning the guns back to the street. They're selling the guns to either to dealers or from their department to people. And it just seems to be hypocritical for them to be complaining about the guns on the street when they are involved with thousands of guns being on the street directly. The federal law enforcement, they melt their guns down when they take a gun out of use. It's melted down and the metal is used for something else. But in our state and local law enforcement agencies, they resell them and get the money off of them so that they can buy something newer or better. Something's wrong with that picture to me.
Oh, that's terrible. Now, one departure issue that is, I forgot to cover that I've had a lot of questions about when I see people out and about in the street, that is defamation. During our last political election, there was just a bunch of really nasty advertising by primarily Republicans that were running for office. And it had to do with libel and slander. And I was constantly telling people, well, it's kind of difficult. See, in order to prove a defamation, there are two types of defamation. There's libel, things that are written, or slander, things that are oral. And here's the catch. Opinions are being protected by the First Amendment. So if a person expresses an opinion, even though you disagree with the opinion, it's protected by the First Amendment. And the second part is that in order to have a defamation case, there's like 4 elements. First, you start off with a false statement or allegation. The second component is that it's got to be communicated to a third person. In other words, if somebody tells a lie, it's got to be told to someone else or publicly it's done. And the third, they have to do it like with fault or negligence. And then the most important part, the fourth component, damages. So in other words, if you're going to do a defamation action, you got to have damages or harm. Well, the problem though is that, folks, when you were talking about these politicians, because they are deemed public figures, there's a higher standard. That is that you have to show what is called actual malice, which is a standard that's a mountain that's too high to climb for most politicians. So just keep that in mind, because I know in your life you're going to run across people that tell lies about you, but you have to have those 4 elements in order. First, is the lie an opinion or is it a statement of fact? And so if somebody say, in my opinion, okay, then that would not be defamation. That's a protected speech in the First Amendment. So don't forget. Well, Milton, I enjoyed the conversation today, and I thank our caller for calling in. And next week, we're going to cover some important matters, and we'll give an update because we have American justice system under attack, Milton, because the former president being prosecuted. Everybody say they've losing faith in the judicial system that we've worked so hard to maintain as lawyers.
It's a work in progress. We're still trying to clean it up, make it fair, make it protect all equally. And we haven't gotten there yet, folks. So please, please, please vote this coming November.
And I might add, as a point of departure, it's not just that you need to vote, but you need to call 10 of your friends, your neighbor, make sure they vote and have them call 10 people. Folks, it's all hands on deck. So please, please register, vote, and call 10 others. Thank you and have a blessed day. We'll talk to
All
you
right,
next
bro.
week.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.